after my first year as a freshman at the University of Iowa, I dropped out. I really missed the mark with what was a passion to me as a human being, which was business. The California Clothing Company was the first. Earth Home Candles was my second. My third was Fitness Center. And then I think the next one that we had was the farm. Airbnbs on our property as well, and a lot of our guests. So we renovated that whole trailer into a state-of-the-art coffee truck, operated at the farmer's market every Saturday. We started Chase Auto Rentals, where we rent out vehicles down at near Sky Harbor recently, which we rent out equipment on Outer Rim now. You can rent out inflatable paddle boards, beach equipment, mountain bikes, whatever you want in Arizona. But as a society in general, I do think that we've lost a lot of our skills to critical think and problem solve in the moment. I always saw entrepreneurship as being in a fishing boat, and I am the type of person that will cast 15 lines into the water, trying to figure out which one catches fish. Why I created this podcast. I hope that our listeners can tune in every week and feel some connectedness to make them feel as though they're not going through something alone. Welcome to the Every Turn Podcast, a place for entrepreneurs to tell their stories, share some of their industry knowledge and secrets, explore their challenges, and yes, of course, their successes found within it all. I'm your host, Chad Chase, and I look forward to sharing this week's episode with all of you, so let's dive right in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Every Turn Podcast. I am your host, Chad, and I am joined today with my friend, Keith, who is going to help me kick off the first episode, which is interviewing me about my past, my history, my experience with business, to give all of you, our listeners, an idea of what I've done in the past and maybe some credibility about what I'm doing here at the podcast and into the future. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you so much, Chad, for having me. I am so excited to be here and chat about you and entrepreneurship and everything that you're doing out there.
Yeah, we've been really hustling this summer and trying out some new stuff. I'm sure you have some questions for me that will dig into some of those things and hopefully have our listeners kind of understand what I'm about and what I want to do in the future.
Excellent. And I should also say that I'm approaching this podcast as an entrepreneur myself. I am a business owner and I'm very curious because I'm a young business owner. And so I'm very intrigued by the idea of entrepreneurship and all of the process and procedures that go into it. And I feel like I can learn a lot from you. So I'm very much looking forward to this. And you are incredibly organized and you've prepared some wonderful outlined questions for me that I am very excited to ask you today.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because my sister is starting out on her entrepreneurial endeavor and my family is very afraid to ask me questions.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think probably because I like to take control of things. And my sister today was asking me about website stuff. And I said, well, just send me over the link to become a collaborator on it. And I'll go ahead and take a look at the form that wasn't submitting to her properly. And she's like, well, it's not working. Oh, it's not working still. I guess I'll just give you full permission. And I could tell there was hesitancy behind it. But I went ahead and got the item fixed that she needed and then fixed some of her layout in her mobile website stuff. So
I can speak a little bit to how she might be feeling. I know that there's always a fear of judgment. I do a lot of creative marketing in my current full-time job that I have outside of entrepreneurship, and giving people access to something kind of behind the scenes that you're working on. Process is clunky. So we're always kind of scared to share the process. And so I can definitely relate to your sister a little bit.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
So speaking of family, let's go back in time. So let's chat about young Chad. So tell me, where does the story begin and how did you end up discovering your love for business?
Yeah, so I grew up in Dubuque, Iowa, where, it's the mighty Mississippi. Well, they call it the masterpiece on the Mississippi. And it is a very beautiful town, very old architecture, the red brick buildings. Before I left Dubuque, the city council really focused on economic development, and they brought in a bunch of businesses, gave them tax kickbacks. IBM was one of them. And there's something that I learned as a young adult back then about government and private industry partnerships. The city invested a lot into IBM, but I knew what was going to happen, and it did eventually happen. when those kickbacks ended, which is called a TIF back in Iowa, so they're getting tax revenue kicked back to them to cover certain expenses. And there's different programs that can do different things. But essentially, I believe it was like an 8-year or 10-year program for them. And once that was over, they left town. And so there was a lot of people that moved to the city. It seemed like we were just on this precipice of the future. So much stuff was going on.
Lots of possibility.
And a lot of new jobs popping up. You know, they had the traditional stuff that's been around for a while. John Deere has a plant out there that's fairly large still. They produce things like crawlers, skid steers and stuff like that.
Your father just retired from John Deere, right?
Yeah, last week was his last day. And we actually took a tour out there, which was quite interesting. But my whole family has worked there for the most part. My grandfather had worked there. He had been retired ever since I really had known because of a pension kind of loophole. They had a foundry on site. So they'd bring in raw materials and they would melt down those raw materials and create what they needed. They really built everything.
Wow.
Very vertically integrated in that in that space. And they've gotten rid of a lot of that. The foundry is no longer there. But when you worked in the foundry, it was such an awful place to work that you would actually get 2 years of service towards your pension for every 1 year worked. So the more time you put in there, the earlier you got to retire.
Harsh conditions, I would assume, or not the most ideal working conditions that you might want to work in.
Yeah. I mean, if you can imagine what a foundry is like, it's hot all the time.
Melting hot metals. Yeah.
Yeah. That type of thing. And he used to tell us stories about coming home and, you know, cleaning out his eyes of metal shrapnel, like shards and stuff from machining. And, you know, it's just what the job was, but he didn't have anything. I'm not even sure he had a high school degree. He may have just graduated from 8th grade and then went right to work. But he learned his job. He worked his way up through the ladder and retired, I think probably after I was born, but my conscious memory, all I know him as is retired.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, grew up in Dubuque, beautiful place. It's kind of an awkward stage economically right now. John Deere is probably one of the only large employers, and I think they have around 1,500 people. But
you mentioned TIF, and so like after those tax kickbacks were over, a lot of those industries you said left. So that had to have had an impact on the local economy?
Oh yeah, I mean, very large manufacturing place. So John Deere, Flex Steel furniture used to be built there. They moved all their manufacturing overseas, and their headquarters is still there. McGraw-Hill Publishing,
yeah,
used to have a huge, beautiful mid-century modern factory. As a kid, we'd go behind there for the fireworks festival. There was a ridge along the Mississippi where the buildings were, and we would watch the fireworks. They moved downtown to a newer area. That's where their headquarters are. They do no more printing in the Dubuque area. So all of those jobs had left. We used to have a huge meat packing plant. I hate to say it, but I'm glad that the place is gone. The smell was just unimaginable. It was, as a child growing up, going to school at recess time, you never knew what you were going to smell, but it wasn't good most of the time.
I grew up near a corn and soybean processing industry. And so, I mean, there was a lot of variety of smells from in Decatur, Illinois, also a Midwestern boy here. So I can very much relate to those feelings.
Yep. I lived in Cedar Rapids for a while in the ADM plant, processed corn. It's a smell you don't forget.
Oh, never.
But yeah, I mean, I loved growing up in Dubuque. I loved my family. I still go back there often. I was just back there last week. And what I loved the most was there was 2 programs that I got involved in. Junior Achievement as a young student in high school. So just starting out freshman year, you would join. They had different businesses that you would form. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, students would meet. There'd be about 3 groups on each night. Each one was their own separate business. They'd have to elect their own officers. They would bring money in to buy their own stock shares of their company. Then they got a portion of money from Junior Achievement to create their product. Once they've created their product, then they were off selling that product at various places. And you were competing against each other in this designed economy that was very much real world. And I learned a lot of that, the values that I still use today in business with that, even though I was extremely young back then. I went on to teach junior achievement courses at a local elementary school. Actually, my sister was in. And after that, I joined another group called Business Professionals of America. It was a little bit more focused on office and back office business, but definitely something as an entrepreneur, you need to know those things. I was a state officer for BPA for quite some time for the state of Iowa, both at the high school level and the collegiate level. I had a lot of fun doing those things. And I learned a lot about web development, which was just coming to fruition in history.
Turn of the century. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was a lot of fun. And, that's just where it all began.
So this is all happening during like high school years, presumably, right?
Yeah. So BPA, I was able to go into college with because they have a high school level and then they also have a collegiate level. And then they actually have an alumni level as well that I just never really got involved with. But I started the first virtual chapter in college with BPA because the University of Iowa didn't have our own chapter. And there were a lot of colleges that didn't. So we wanted to find a way to connect the people that had been in BPA in high school and try to get them connected in college and continue on. So we were the first virtual chapter that existed online.
Very nice. So we were chatting a little bit about college now, moving forward in your timeline. So I would assume that you did go to college. What was your collegiate experience like in relationship to this entrepreneurial drive that you have?
Yeah. So this is funny. In Dubuque, and it was about 2004, the governor of Iowa was doing some rounds. Actually, I don't think he was not the governor of Iowa anymore. He was actually the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack.
Okay.
And he is the current Secretary of Agriculture, if I am not mistaken. He was doing some campaigning in Dubuque down at a place my mom worked. And she invited me down and we got to meet Tom and we got some one-on-one time. And I was young, senior in high school. And he came over to me and I said, Tom, what would you say to somebody that's wanting to get involved in politics and is as young as I am? And he told me, well, go to school for what you love. And if you want to get involved in politics, get involved in politics, but at least you'll always have that fallback plan with your education. He was right. I didn't listen to him. So I went to the University of Iowa for political science. I did that for about a year. I loved the University of Iowa and I loved my freshman year of college, but I really missed the mark with what was a passion to me as a human being, which was business. I went for political science. It was not what I was interested in. I really struggled keeping myself connected to the content that I was supposed to be learning. And so after my first year as a freshman at the University of Iowa, I dropped out. And I ended up going to Kirkwood Community College, where I focused on business finally, which I should have done in the beginning. And so I really enjoyed the classes that I took at Kirkwood. I got my associate's degree in management and a certificate of entrepreneurship in, a certificate of entrepreneurship.
Yes. Certificate in entrepreneurship.
Yes, you got it. And, after that had all kind of taken place, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. So kind of getting the timeline right, I think at that point I had a new relationship. I finished up my degree. I was working full time at a credit union, and I had one business that I was working on after I left my freshman year of college, and that was a California clothing company that was focused on sourced products in the United States and bringing a new online presence to fashion wear, which was very uncommon back then.
Fashion didn't have a lot of online presence. Yeah. Online shopping was pretty much buying books from Amazon, right?
That was online shopping. Yeah. And so we wanted to, again, bring on a brand that you could buy online. We were trying to figure out how to bring down the cost of shipping and whatnot. And that has a story in of itself. But after I kind of decided that business wasn't exactly where I was going to go, or the technology didn't meet where I wanted it to be at the time, I started another company called Earth Home Candles, which was focused on really at the base of it, agriculture within Iowa. So we bought Iowa soy wax. We made soy wax candles as our foundational product. And then we expanded upon that when it came to like home fragrancing products that we could find, develop, and sell. So we did that for a while. And you'll notice I use we a lot because although it is me that has done all of these things,
we don't do it alone, right?
Yeah.
It takes a village.
It takes a village. And so whether it was, somebody I dated at the time that was helping me with things, friends, family, team members, paid employees, they're all part of my story. And that's why I always use we. So I'll throw that out there.
We don't do it alone.
We don't do it alone. And so we really worked on Earth Home Candles for quite some time and developed that side of things. After my grandmother passed away in 2009, we used a funeral home in Dubuque that the funeral director showed up in a Hawaiian shirt for the visitation. And I was a little perturbed. So after that happened, I started looking up like, what educational experience do you need to be a funeral director? What does the licensing look like? I reached out to the Des Moines Area Community College mortuary science program. And I really figured out what it would take to get started with the mortuary science program in the fall. And lo and behold, I had taken all the prerequisites that I needed to have just out of like happenstance. It was so weird. So the only thing that I was missing was A&P, but it was built into the first semester if you hadn't taken it already.
Anatomy, physiology, right?
Yeah, anatomy and physiology. Hated it.
I love anatomy, physiology. Oh my gosh. I could chat about anatomy forever. I loved my high school anatomy class. But anyway, continue. And also, I had no idea that you had this interest in becoming a funeral director. This is fascinating.
A lot of people say that. I don't know why.
It comes at a very interesting time because I am currently rewatching the classic HBO series 6 Feet Under, which made me want to be a funeral director whenever I was in high school. And I used to get a lot of looks like, why do you want to be a funeral director? And anyway, I'll let you continue with your story first.
So later that year, I got into mortuary science school. It was a remote learning program. So a lot of it was online, but I also had to work at a funeral home back in Cedar Rapids.
Experiential learning, externship level.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the guy that I was seeing at the time was friends with some guys that owned a funeral home in Cedar Rapids, got me connected. I started working for them. Actually, he invited me up to let me do some observation work. And he's like, do you really want to do this? Yeah, I think I do. So I ended up going to school for it, working at Stuart Baxter in Cedar Rapids. And Jacob had really become a friend of mine, still to this day, is a very close friend of mine.
And a mentor, I would imagine as well. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about a lot of things. And, finished the program eventually, moved to Arizona to take care of my great aunt, started working at a funeral home locally. It didn't really work out. So then I ended up moving on to working at Facebook. Did that for about a year in their small to medium-sized business program where they would bring businesses on, teach them how to use the platform to advertise. That was fun. And then I was recruited by Maricopa County Vital Records, which is housed within the public health department. They had a unique position that worked with the funeral board, the medical examiner's office, and funeral home partners. Okay. So they issue all the disposition permits in the state of Arizona. So if you're going to be buried or cremated, there would be a person that looks over the record, ensures that it's complete before they authorize you to pretty much destroy the body if it's being cremated or bury it. I got that job. I worked there for, I think, about 2 years. And then I ended up moving up in the organization. And I finished my bachelor's degree from NAU while I was working at Maricopa County in public administration.
Distance learning program?
Another distance learning program. And the nice part about it was that the county had a reimbursement program. So while I was going through that, I was learning on the job while also learning in school, and finished that up, worked there for a few more years. We bought our farm. Anthony and I bought our farm, and I just had decided that I was going to make the leap.
And here you are today.
And here I am.
You mentioned Anthony and your farm, by the way. So do you consider your farm your first business, or do you consider your first business the one that you created all the way back in high school with Junior Achievement, whenever you were back in Iowa?
Yeah. So the first businesses with Junior Achievement, I wouldn't say are my first businesses.
What would you consider your first?
I think the California Clothing Company was the first. I learned a lot. I remember this horror story with that one where we were trying to bring in jeans from Canada, and they got hung up on the border for months. And so that was my first experience with importing. That was a lot of fun. So that was my first. Earth Home Candles was my second. My third was a fitness center in West Liberty, Iowa. I bought that from another couple that started it. Learned a lot about that process with seller carryback loans, with my first time having a lease and a landlord. It was my first time running a business from a distance. And then it became an even greater distance because I moved to Arizona during that time. I was lucky enough that the building owners actually ended up buying the business from me for what I owed the remaining balance to the previous sellers, because it was a seller carryback loan. A very interesting story, but I got out of it. And there's a reason for everything. But sometimes in business, just being able to get out from underneath something is what you need.
That's a win sometimes in business.
It's a win sometimes. And it just gets you out from underneath this massive weight. And it was at the time. So I got lucky.
I'm learning so much, by the way, about your portfolio of businesses, by the way. I had no idea the breadth of it. I mean, we've been chatting about entrepreneurship here for several months and talking about this podcast and this episode that we wanted to do. So I'm learning so much about you, and I'm still very much intrigued by this funeral director business. I want to ask one more question about it. Did you ever embalm a body?
Oh, yeah. That's what I ended up doing primarily. So when I moved down here and worked at the funeral home in Mesa, I was their primary embalmer, and I was an intern. There was a shortage, and it was chaotic. That's all I can say. I was kind of thrown into it, and it really wore on me quick. And then I went back to work right before the pandemic, after I had quit public health. I went to a funeral that my friend was the funeral director for, that managed the funeral homes down here. And he could tell that I was depressed because I had two businesses going on, but they were slow. They're in the infancy stage. And I had just quit public health. Everybody wants to be retired at a young age. Well, let me tell you, it isn't fun because everyone else is at work and you're sitting alone, and it can become very depressing. And so he saw that. He asked me to come back. I said, I will come back and embalm, but that's all I want to do. I want to embalm at night. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to know anybody. I just want to do my work and get out of there. Well, scope creep occurred. And it was like, oh, can you cover a visitation? Can you go out to a gravesite? Can you help at a funeral? Next thing you know, I'm back in a suit doing all the things I don't want to do. Oh, I enjoyed it a little bit, I guess. And so I got back involved, and then the pandemic hit, and I was embalming all the time.
Gosh.
And I remember the last time I went into the funeral home, and this funeral home would have 5 bodies coming and going at any given time.
Wow.
So that means new ones coming in, others going out for their services. It's an expensive funeral home. At the peak of the pandemic, I walked back, there was about 45 bodies. And I told my friend, I said, I can't do it anymore. I'm done. So that's the end story of what I did as a funeral director.
Anyway, back to entrepreneurship, the topic we're here to discuss a little bit. The topic we are here to focus on, the purpose of the Every Turn podcast. So out of all of your businesses that you have managed over the course of your career, what has been your favorite?
Well, let me finish the linear explanation of the businesses that I've had.
Yeah, please.
And then I'll pick the one out of it. Okay, so we had California Clothing Company, online retailer. I had Earth Home Candles, which is a candle manufacturer and seller. I had the fitness center in West Liberty. Then I moved to Arizona, and Anthony and I started a company importing urns from India, and we were selling those online, called Willow Creek. After that, I was working for a while. And then I think the next one that we had was the farm.
Arendelle Farms.
Yeah, Arendelle Farms. We bought 2 acres in the middle of Phoenix, started growing vegetables and fruit trees.
Where we sit right now, by the way.
Where we are right now. It's really become quite the estate, I guess you could say, over time compared to what it was. We have Airbnbs on our property as well. And a lot of our guests.
Beautiful Airbnbs, by the way.
And a lot of our guests really talk about, how beautiful it is. And it's funny to me because it's not where I want it to be, but it's also not where it was. So when I think about what they say, I'm like, I don't know. But then I remember where we came from, and it does make me feel pretty good.
Well, I think a good entrepreneur is also always looking for a way to improve on their business or their venture, whatever they're doing. It's very forward thinking mindset.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So after that, while we were getting the farm up and running, there was a girl at Public Health, or a lady at Public Health, that was selling it was a shaved ice trailer, and she wanted to get rid of it. We went and looked at it. We were wanting to do a mobile coffee shop. We got to the place that she had it, looked over it. The next day at work, I said, I'll give you X amount of dollars for it. Kind of going back and forth. And then the next day she messaged me. She said, okay, done. So I think on our lunch break, we walked down to the bank and I got her the money and, gave her the cashier's check for it.
Did you go to the ATM or get like a money order? Yeah. Well,
it was
picturing like a suitcase full of like cash.
No, we got a cashier's check.
Okay.
But when we went back to pick it up, we didn't have a vehicle that could haul this trailer. And we were going to borrow Anthony's dad's truck, but that came with its own set of complications. And I told Anthony, I found a Tundra at Belford down the road. Let's go look at it. I got off at, I think, 3:00, came and picked him up. He was able to get off. We went down there, started negotiating with the guy, ended up getting a hell of a deal on it. He thought I was using it as a tactic, but I kept saying, I gotta go. We gotta go. We gotta be somewhere at 4:30. Like we can't be here. And I said, either the whole thing that was catching us up was the trade-in. We had a Tacoma. And I said, can't remember what it was. I think it was like $28,000 is what I wanted for it. And they kept doing all this crazy math.
As they do at car dealerships. Yeah.
So I started doing it back to him. And he was getting confused. And finally I said, either I write you a check for the $35,000 you want for the truck here, and we get no trade-in, I'll just pay you for the truck. Or the state can make the tax off of me, or you can have the opportunity to try to make the tax back on this truck. I don't know. They ended up taking whatever I wanted. We got out of there, picked up that trailer, and headed back to the farm late at night. And that's where the adventure began with Urban Grounds Coffee. So we renovated that whole trailer into a state-of-the-art coffee truck, operated at the farmer's market every Saturday for about 4 years, sold it to our longtime employee, Grayson, who will eventually be on the podcast at some point. After that, the farm really started to evolve into its own thing. We became a chicken egg farm that we were commercially licensed through the state of Arizona. We had a whole egg washing facility on site. And during the pandemic, the feed prices got so high, we had to close that all down.
And you were also doing all of that work on your own, you and Anthony, right?
The egg stuff, yes.
Yeah.
Once we started doing field cropping after the chickens were gone, we hired a few folks during the pandemic to try to make sure that was successful. That's a whole nother story again. I mean, these could all be offshoots of things, but it got complicated.
Yeah.
So we ended up just doing fruit trees. That's where we're at now, is fruit trees on the farm. And, a lot of people think it's a monocrop. I don't believe so, because we have so many growing seasons. So we have citrus, stone fruit, although they're all fruit trees, there's different seasons for them, which I would consider not being a monocrop. After that, while we were in the midst of the pandemic in 2020, I always see downturns as opportunities. And I had our sales rep from our coffee roaster call us and said, I have a place in Scottsdale that they're trying to lease. There were some folks over there that tried doing a coffee shop, grocery store concept, and they are looking to sell all the assets and lease the space. So I talked to Anthony. We had some money that was saved up. And I said, let's go over and take a look at it. Went over, met with the gal that was selling it. And later that night, we had a deal kind of formulated with them. They sent it back again. We nailed things down, submitted a LOI, which is a letter of intent to purchase the assets and sign a lease. I think about a few days later, everything was kind of solidified with that. That had become Chadwick's Urban Market in Scottsdale. We ran that for 3 years until our lease came up, and we decided not to renew it for various reasons. After that, well, actually, I shouldn't say after that. During Chadwick's, we started Chase Auto Rentals, where we rent out vehicles down at near Sky Harbor Airport. That business has been kind of fun. We actually are going to have an episode about Turo and the rental car business. So look out for that. Shameless plug.
Plug all you want. This is your show.
And you guys are here for the content, right?
Right? Yeah.
So did the car rental thing, still in operation today. Still trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing with that. During all that stuff and after I closed Chadwick's, I focused more heavily on the Airbnbs, but then there was something that I wanted to try out, which was renting out RVs. We had talked to a few friends that had done it in the past, and I really wanted to get back to Arizona wilderness. I love it out here. I love the wilderness.
Beautiful. The desert drew me from the Midwest. I don't know. Was that the appeal for you? I remember the first time I visited the desert, I was like, I'm going to live here someday.
Yeah, I would say it was something like that. But I would say like the wilderness for me, I love the heat.
Yeah.
But I love like Flagstaff. I love some of these southern canyons that get crispy cold at night. And that to me isn't easily accessible. I remember the first time I moved down here and somebody wanted to go camping. I was like, we're going to go where? In the middle of what? In Iowa, we didn't have national parks. We didn't have national forests. I didn't know how any of that worked. So it was very inaccessible to me until somebody taught me what I was doing. And so we started Outer Rim, which really we're focusing on how to connect people to nature. We're going to start in Arizona and kind of grow from there, trying to take down these boundaries that have been created by, honestly, it's the federal government's inability to create effective websites is what it is.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to drive somewhere anymore, get there and be like, oh, my RV doesn't have this special sticker that it's required for this RV park. I can't park here. Now I'm going to have to try to figure something else out. Mm-hmm. We are just not that species anymore. We don't get in the car and just aimlessly drive off into the East Coast or West Coast.
I do. I mean, that's just because I love road trips. But yeah, I get what you're saying, that like it's become a culture of convenience and we just want things done for us.
That, but we're also planners. We have information at our fingertips. Mm-hmm. And so instead of having this fearless energy about us, we have this prepared energy. So we go online, we look things up, we figure it out before we get there. I think we still have some problem solving and critical thinking skills that can help us in the moments of despair. But as a society in general, I do think that we've lost a lot of our skills to critical think and problem solve in the moment. And I see that just in the younger folks that I've hired. We have to develop those. I'm not afraid to do it, but it is one of those things that I see missing. And I don't know if it's because our educational system is failing students in that realm of things, or if it's just something that isn't sticking when it comes to the educational process.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that. I was actually just speaking to a chief learning officer of an education institution recently, and I asked him if he were to go back to high school. He was a former high school English teacher. If he were to go back now and teach something, what would he teach? And he said critical thinking, because it's something that you don't necessarily see anymore. It's really fascinating that you made that point too and have that observation as well.
It's almost to the point too where I think if you graduate 8th grade and you graduate high school as a senior, before you do either of those things, you should be put into an age appropriate escape room. And if you don't get out of it, you don't graduate.
That sounds like a horror movie in my the plot of a horror movie almost.
Well, it's not going to fill up with water or anything like that.
That's what I'm picturing. Yeah. If there's like a time limit involved, what's the consequence? I don't know.
So yeah, I think the question that you had asked is what my favorite business was.
Favorite, and also get into least favorite as well. Were there any other businesses? We talked about Outer Rim, by the way, which you have provided this lovely coaster to advertise.
Yeah, that's one thing that my family will say is that I like printing my business logos on everything.
You're very good at that.
I don't know what it is, but I just feel like it's real to me if I have a shirt with it, with it on it or whatnot. CM Chase Hospitality, which is on my shirt, isn't another business, but it's the overarching business.
Yes.
And, we were out paddleboarding recently, which we rent out equipment on Outer Rim now. You can rent out inflatable paddle boards, beach equipment, mountain bikes, whatever you want in Arizona. It's available to our Airbnb guests. It's available to other folks. It's available to the folks that rent our RVs. We'll have it packed up and ready for them to go already. It's a really cool way to not have to make the investment in the equipment or to try one out before you even buy one.
Right.
I love the brands that we carry, but they are very expensive. And so having that accessible to individuals, I think is important.
Very much. Where can people go to find more information on Outer Rim, by the way?
Outer Rim's website is outeradventures.com.
Outer Adventures.
It's outradventures.com.
Perfect. Anyway, always got to remember to plug your stuff, by the way.
I'll try.
So anyway, favorite and least favorite businesses. And I think we've chatted. Have we covered everything, by the way, in terms of your business portfolio?
Yeah.
So favorite and least favorite.
I think my favorite has been the Airbnbs.
Why so?
Because it's one of those things. I always saw entrepreneurship as being in a fishing boat. And I am the type of person that will cast 15 lines into the water, trying to figure out which one catches fish. And with Airbnb, one thing that I learned was I got tired of it for a while. I got tired of it for a while.
How long has it been?
I think it's been 5 years.
Okay.
4 or 5 years. We almost have 1,000 reviews. And our score out of 5 is 4.98. It used to be 4.99. But I don't worry about that. Again, another episode.
4.98 is very high, though. Yeah.
4.98. And we've had hundreds of visitors. But what I like most about that is it's something that has taught me to slow down, focus on the needs of the guest based off reality. A lot of people don't live in reality anymore. They think home, everywhere else should be like home, which is where we came up with the tagline for this company. Which is, now you're putting me on the spot. I got to remember it. No, but it is anywhere but home.
And how did you come up with that?
Well, we were out paddleboarding and I was sitting there thinking about these guests and there's only been a handful of them, but they give feedback. And it's like, if somebody's staying in one of our Airbnbs and they're like, the sink is really small. I can agree with that. Yeah. And I put it in the back of my head. And when we remodel, we'll put in a bigger sink. But we also had a guy and I swear to God, I'm going to write a book someday. And this chapter is going to be called A Place to Put My Socks. I had a guy that gave me private feedback in Airbnb that said, I need to put cubbies above the bench by the door so he has a place to put his socks.
Specifically to put his socks.
That is feedback that is useless to just about anybody. And you have to know that. You have to know that that is not useful.
Yeah. And
I can't please that person. I could never please that person. I think he still gave us 5 stars. But, sometimes you get that feedback and you're like, oh, I should have had cubbies. No, you shouldn't have.
Yeah.
It's very specific to that person. don't go chasing every rabbit hole or you're going to drive yourself crazy. So I've learned that throughout the years with Airbnb. We've gotten really good at it. And now with Outer Rim, I've loved both of these things so much that we are working towards a new project that I'm not going to talk about right now, but it's going to marry those two things together.
Tease. I'm looking forward to learning about what you're marrying together.
We're working on the business plan right now, and there's several buildings involved. It's going to be built out. And so I've had a draftsperson drafting all the buildings. We have a 3D rendering individual that's 3D rendering them because it'll eventually be on our website. And I want people to be able to go on and click in it, and it'll be pulled up and you'll be able to see exactly what we are visualizing this thing to turn into. It's going to take a community buy-in wherever we build it. And so I really wanted it to have some visual presentation so that it's easier for people to buy into.
So your favorite business, Airbnb, so far has been bringing people into your space, the space that you have created, and showing a large amount of hospitality. Something that you're doing to me right now, since you've invited me into your home, into your studio. Have you named your studio, by the way?
No.
You need to. You need to name this space, whether it's Arendelle Farm Studio or Everyday Turn Studio, whatever it is. You need to name this space.
I'll have to figure that out.
Yeah. That's the next project for you.
I probably should name it after the gentleman that painted this painting.
Who painted this? This is wonderful, by the way.
So Ken Flanagan lives in Las Vegas, and we were at a show of his, and we fell in love with this painting. We actually fell in love with a lot of his stuff. He's very takes a real world thing, pulls what you would imagine out of it, and then puts it together in something that makes your brain go, that's all I can say about his work. It just always makes you go,
It does make me go, because you have the famous portrait of Abraham Lincoln, and then in front of his face, you have his $5 bill that has Abraham Lincoln in front of it, and it's torn and tattered a little bit. And I haven't looked much at the $5 note that's in there, but is there anything that's off about the note?
No, the only thing that is in there, I believe his name is in there. I think Ken is in there somewhere on the serial numbers.
I can see it right below the serial numbers, actually. Ken Flanagan, right in the bottom right corner.
Oh, he signed it.
Yep, he signed it
where
right there.
I think the Treasury Secretary would sign.
Yes, that's interesting. That's a wonderful piece. You've put a lot of thought into this space. So anyway, going back to hospitality, thank you again for welcoming me into your space.
Yeah, for sure. I can't be more thankful for you to join us today. Me, our listeners.
And we're not done yet either.
And we're not.
Yeah. So
you said least favorite.
Yes. We need to explore your least favorite business that you have pursued.
I think out of all of them, it unfortunately has to be Chadwick's.
Yeah.
And again, it could be its own episode by itself. And there's so many layers to it because it was a cafe grocery store. I leased space, so I didn't own it. A whole nother level of things. We had a liquor license, so we had a small bar, beer and wine bar. We sold wine. We were focused on locally sourced products. So a lot of our stuff was made in the state of Arizona. That has its own set of problems that it comes with.
Working with local vendors.
Yeah, local makers.
Yeah.
And it's because a lot of them are just starting out and they don't know. And that's, again, why I really wanted to start this podcast, because they'll be at one farmer's market and they're selling a crap ton of stuff and their margins are okay. Usually when they're okay, it's because they don't deduct the cost of their time at the farmer's market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? The overhead at a farmer's market isn't extremely high. Maybe you pay 10 to 15% to the farmer's market and then your time to sit there. Now, if you expand and you go to another farmer's market, like in the Valley, there's probably 10, 20 different farmer's markets. Now you have to pay somebody to actually sit there if it's on the same exact day as your other one. Kind of puts things into a little bit more of a perspective when it comes to actual true costs of doing business. So I always told those people, they'd come to me and say, well, will you carry my product? Yeah, I will. How many farmers markets are you in? Well, we're just in the one. Well, until you've gone to every direct sales location, every farmer's market, and you've maxed out all the farmers markets in the valley, I really don't want to sell your product. And there's a reason for that.
I was going to ask why.
Because those folks aren't ready to wholesale. They'd come up to me and they say, well, I'd ask, well, what are the margins? Well, I'll sell it to you at 90% retail and you can make 10. Whoa, you're making this out of your house. What's your overhead?
Yeah.
Like my overhead here is outrageous. $1,500 a month electric bill, $3,000 a month in rent.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think $10,000, $15,000 in payroll. I mean, it goes on. And it's like, okay, so you want me to sell something and only get 10% while you take 90% and your overhead is the lowest between the two of us. So to me, that tells me that their supply chain isn't up to par enough to bring their costs down.
Yeah.
To actually give me the 50% margin that I need.
Yeah.
So to me, it's build out your direct to consumer sales, which are at farmers markets, ramp up the raw materials that you're buying so that you can bring down your margins on your cost of goods. So that way you can actually wholesale at a decent price.
Interesting. So it's kind of, you say that the market, it was your least favorite. However, something that I'm hearing that's really unique is that you have taken that as a learning opportunity, and an opportunity to inspire you to create this podcast and share that experience with the other entrepreneurs that are out there so that they don't make the same mistakes. And I don't think that is necessarily, I don't think it should make it your least favorite. It still might be your least favorite entrepreneurial endeavor, but it's something that has created a whole new objective for you. So I'm kind of curious as to if whether or not do you regret that experience at all?
There are some regrets in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it's my least favorite.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't regret the experience as a whole, but there are some things that I allowed people to get away with that I really regret.
Yeah.
And there are some things that I did that I really regret in all of that. I think we'll get into it a little bit later.
Yeah.
On some of those things, but it's my least favorite. It was the most, and I'll put it simply as this. And there's another lesson to be learned out of all. I always told people that they said, well, why do you name it Chadwick's? I said, well, it's what my cousins used to call me when I was a kid. And inside is this outward expression of myself. Don't do that to yourself. Don't. Because you'll sit there in your business someday and you'll hear somebody criticizing something and you'll internalize it because you fully believe that what you have created is an outward expression of you. And it can be a piece of you, and it can be a creative, artistic design that you've come up with, but it can't be you. And I always regret naming that store after myself and doing that to myself, because when things happened, I internalized it and it really hurt me on various levels of things. I think that's why I hate it the least. I hate it the most. Or I dislike it. It's the one I don't like the most.
But the learning opportunity, the fact that you got something out of that, I think has immense value. And I also think that you've discovered another topic for a future podcast episode, which would be mental health with entrepreneurship, and dealing and struggling with that, because it can be kind of an isolating experience if you don't create the village and the support system that you need to get to the next level. I truly think. I was talking to a chief learning officer recently about they were celebrating a graduation ceremony, and all of the people that helped the graduates along the way to get to where they are, to get to that one moment. And so having that village, I think is a important thing that I always come back to whenever I think about what I'm trying to do and all of the endeavors that I try to undertake as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's exactly why I created this podcast, because there were so many moments of despair where I felt like I was floating in this vast ocean of nothingness by myself. I hope that our listeners can tune in every week and feel some connectedness, feel some type of information or a story that I tell or a story that a guest, visitor tells that resonates with them, to make them feel as though they're not going through something alone, that there are others out there just like you struggling with these same exact things.
You've created a great space. I've got a few more questions for you, by the way. So business skills. So what's something that you think you are really good at? I've identified that you're really good at hospitality. So what do you think you're really good at?
One thing I think I really am good at and I enjoy is creating what I would call an ecosystem of a business. So, the printing of things on things. I think about when somebody walks into an Airbnb or they rent an RV, all of those things there's a sensory piece to it, right? So they're designed a certain way, they look a certain way, they smell a certain way, they sound a certain way. It's all designed to create this one unique experience. And and that's where I got this tagline from. I was paddleboarding on Lake Pleasant, and I kept thinking about those complaints from other guests where it's like, this isn't like home. This isn't like home. It's not. It's not like home. It's an experience. It's anywhere but home.
Yes. You've done a great job in designing. I think it's like the Disney experience. It's what you're describing to me. Disney is so laid out on a compass. That's the way they describe it. I've been to the Disney customer service training before. And it's very culty, by the way, but it's also like the level of thought that goes into it. You subconsciously notice it. And so I think that's something that you've done very well here at Arendelle Farms and a lot of the experiences that you've created in your environment.
Thanks. We're always evolving, kind of like Disneyland as well. So things continue to change and they change for the better. And it's all based off of customer feedback that is tangible and usable to the majority of our guests.
And you live and learn through your successes and your failures and your challenges along the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the final question that I have, at least on the cards that you have provided me. So
awesome.
What is the most important lesson that you have learned as an entrepreneur? This is a great question that you should ask to all of your guests that you have on the podcast, by the way.
Yeah, it is a good question. To be honest, I forgot what questions were on these cards. So it's good because it makes me really think in the moment. And, the thing about entrepreneurship is that I was just talking to my mom about this on the phone. I've always wanted to be, I'm not going to lie about this. This might sound weird and it might be crazy, but maybe there is a scene in this movie that resonated with a lot of you, maybe even with yourself, but the movie Tommy Boy.
I love Tommy Boy, by the way.
I always wanted to be Tom Callahan Sr.
Really?
I wanted to be the guy that gave people jobs and the people that appreciated the jobs that I gave. I always said in Chadwick's that I was creating good jobs for good people. And I meant that. That's what my goal was. And I've learned a lot through that process. Employees today, they don't invest in a company like they used. They come in, they do the bare minimum work that they need to do for the paycheck that they receive, and that's that. And I think as a business owner, I had become really bad at enforcing that agreement. Because if you're at the bare minimum of something, like they don't perform, it really affects the bottom line of the business.
Absolutely.
And I let a lot of people, a lot of our team members affect the bottom line of our business because I was too afraid to let them go. And there were market dynamics that kind of yielded that as well. During the pandemic, when I couldn't find anybody to work for like $30 an hour, that was nuts. That was crazy. The work was not complicated. It was fairly simple, but they just didn't want to do it. And so I really had to bow and let things slide in moments that those people should have been let go. And so I learned this important lesson. A, to let people go. B, don't be afraid to hire people. And if they don't work out, they don't work out. You can let them go.
Yeah.
And C, the way you let somebody go. I had there was this one person that I let go and I blew up when I did it.
How so?
I blew up when I did it.
We're talking anger.
Anger.
Yeah.
And this person, I mean, I like them. I like them. They're fun. They're energetic. They're creative. I think that I know that they're out there starting their own business because I've watched off the wings. And I hope that they're successful. And I wish that they didn't have this experience that I had created to where they are so probably not willing or wanting to reach out to ask questions. That's not how I want to end relationships. And I made a mistake in that moment. And I really, truly regret that because there could have been an amicable way to say, look, I think you want something different than what this job provides, or I'm capable of providing as your leader. So I think we're going to go separate ways. It just got really messy in the end, and blowing up was not right. So that was the one lesson that I learned, was to let people down gently. And if they truly do mean something to you, when you do break away from them, helping them understand why you're letting them go. And I the last person that I fired, I did just that. And it was the best breakup I've ever been through. And we're still friends. And it was the best thing for that person. Sometimes you're holding people back, and you think that they need you. And some people do.
Yeah.
But others you're just holding back. And you're holding yourself back. Like everybody's being held back because there's something about change that brings about a new perspective for folks, that brings about this new energy in what they do in their family life and their drive to be better, to better themselves, to better the world. And stagnation is the absolute enemy to progress.
That's very intuitive. And to have that level of insight into the people that you work with as well, to identify the fact that, okay, I'm not for you, you're not for me, we need to go our separate ways. But the fact that we can do that at a level that is adult and is constructive for both people involved is a great lesson to learn, and a great lesson to hear as well for someone who has been fired from a job before. It's not a good feeling, and it continues to not be a good feeling until you understand that there is probably a better reason behind it and a higher purpose behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's various reasons for getting fired. I mean, there's economic climates, there's performance side of things. The thing about the performance piece for me as a business owner is some quote that I've always kind of reminded myself of is CFO, which I have a hard time with. And that's the track Anthony's on.
Being in charge of the money, the dollar bills.
Yeah. And a CFO was once sitting in a CEO's office and he said, what if we develop our employees and they leave? Thinking about the amount of money that's going to go with them after they walk out the door. And the CEO looked at the CFO and said, what if we develop our employees, or what if we don't develop our employees and they stay? What's more detrimental to your business?
Yeah.
Having employees that you've never developed that stay forever and just continue to bring your business down? Or is it better to develop them and they may possibly leave?
From my perspective, it's better to develop them with the hope that they will stay, because when you invest in your employees, you invest in the future of your company.
I believe that wholeheartedly as well.
Well, awesome. I have one more question for you.
Sure.
This wasn't on the cards, but we've chatted a little bit about the village. So I'd like to just chat a little bit about your village. You've talked a little bit about Anthony, your husband. How long have you two been married, by the way?
Oh, great.
I know. I'm going to put you on the spot and have you do math.
Well, we were married in 2016.
Okay, so that's 8 years.
Okay, perfect. You're better at math than me. That's why I have him to do all the math.
Were you married in the fall, winter anniversary?
Yeah, we were married on Labor Day.
Okay, so you're coming up on it would be your 8th anniversary, actually.
Yeah, and it's funny because we've never celebrated our anniversary.
Really?
Maybe when we were dating, we did, but maybe unintentionally. Like it was just, oh, it's our anniversary. I may have planned something just because I was going to do it anyways, but made it just maybe a little bit more special because it was on the anniversary. But to us, maybe as we get older, it will change. But to us, we felt like it was kind of that proverbial, like counting like when people count their steps type of thing. Like, oh, we made another year. We made another year. And it's not about that. It's about the life that we live with each other always, all the time. Not about this, oh, if we can make it one more year. That isn't what it is. We want every day to count. We want to continue to invest in ourselves every day, not just on one day of the year.
Yeah.
And that's why we have a really hard time buying Christmas gifts and stuff like that too, because if we want to give each other a gift, we just do it. Or we buy what we want for ourselves.
I'm a bad gift giver as well, but you have the same approach to your relationship as you do with entrepreneurship, and the fact that it's you never giving up is not the right word, but constantly working and constantly knowing that this is a partnership and it takes effort if you want it to work.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I could go deep into relationships and why I think ours works out as well as it does, but
we'll save that for another episode whenever I can interview both you and Anthony here in the hot seat.
And that actually might be a good episode. Building a business with your partner.
I think so too. That's going to be a great topic. And I look forward to maybe being back in the host seat here, the guest host seat to facilitate that conversation.
Yeah. It may be interesting just having him in an episode that's, titled "How to Say No."
So just to tease some future episodes, this is your pilot. This is your first episode.
This is the first one.
So what's coming down the pipeline? Who are you going to be chatting with soon? What are some of the other topics that you're going to be addressing?
Yeah. So what's coming up is mobile food and beverage business. The next one after that should be Turo as a business. Social media marketing is coming up. I eventually want to have my friend that's the funeral director that owns the funeral home back in Iowa. I'd like to have him on.
I would love to listen to that episode or just be behind the camera and watch you two record whenever you do that, by the way, because I have so many questions for that person.
Yeah, we may do a special episode in October. If I can find another funeral director, it would be fun to do. At Chadwick's, we did a night called Moments with a Mortician. And folks came in, and I had a friend of mine that's a funeral director here in Arizona just take questions from the crowd. And it's funny because I advertised the heck out of it. And I think maybe one person showed up from the advertisement. Everyone else just kind of stumbled in. They were like vacationing. And they were like, "You're doing what? We're coming back for that." And it was so much fun. It was so much fun. So maybe we could do something where we just collect questions from all of our listeners, over a period of time and go through the questions.
That's awesome. Is there a place where people can submit questions to you, whether an email, a website, anything like that? Where can your listeners go to interact with you?
Yeah. So Every Turn Podcast on pretty much every social media platform, Instagram, Facebook, and the other one, Instagram, Facebook,
LinkedIn.
No, I think that's it. I think it's Instagram and Facebook, I think are the two social media platforms that I'm going to keep up with. Oh, YouTube. Where our viewers are tuned into.
How could we forget about you?
Yeah, you're right there. So yeah, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Every Turn Podcast. Then everyturnpodcast.com is our website. That's everyturnpodcast.com. We're building that out slowly, so it's definitely has some clunkiness to it. We'll have a submission form on there too for questions that folks might have. That might be a segment we may add into this over time. Just a weekly question that a guest has submitted. It may not be applicable to the overarching topic, but I don't know. I feel like they're kind of long episodes because it's just such a unique environment and you just don't know what you're going to kind of get out of guests. So they seem to range, or they seem to be ranging anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours. So some of them we may have to break into 2 episodes just so it's more digestible to our listeners.
Exactly. And that's the fun part of doing podcasts, is not knowing what you're going to get. It's very Forrest Gump, very box of chocolate style.
Very box of chocolates.
And I'd like to end with a quote, just because you mentioned Tommy Boy, and I had no idea that other people were as passionate about Tommy Boy as I was, but it's the Brian Dennehy quote from that movie. You can get a good look at a T-bone by sticking your head up a bull's. And can I swear on this?
Yeah,
part?
Go for it.
You can get a good look at a T-bone steak by sticking your head up a bull's ass, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it.
And in the words of Tommy Boy, you can get a good look at a T-bone by sticking your head up the butcher's ass. But once you rather take his word for it.
Exactly. I feel that way about entrepreneurship too. Thank you so much for allowing me to come here to interview you and to honestly become kind of like my entrepreneurship mentor. I'm looking forward to all of the episodes and all the guests that you're having on the Every Turn podcast. And I am very, very grateful for this day.
Keith, I can't thank you enough for joining me. I also can't thank my listeners enough for joining us. All of you guys out there. Again, you can find all this information, our YouTube channel, our Spotify channel, at everyturnpodcast.com. And just like that, this episode of the Every Turn Podcast is complete. I'd like to thank my guest for visiting with me on this episode, and to you, our listeners. Let's meet back here next week and discover the next turn. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast provider. Until next time, I'm Chad Chase.